Why is fruit sugar processed differently by the body than refined sugars? Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today, but a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, be greatly appreciated. If you're not following or subscribed, please do so. And if you guys will answer this question for me, let me know if you have had periods of time where you ate lots and lots of fruit in your diet and you suffered no negative effects like refined sugars. Again, plenty of people have this experience and there's good reason for it. And it is because the way that we absorb them is the problem. You know, again, people say, oh, yes, the fructose, right? Fructose is the issue. And they are correct. Fructose is the problem. The issue is then people say, well, don't fruits have all these fructose? In fact, that came out in a live I was doing with Ariel when I was at a certain point. I was actually recomping a bit while eating huge amounts of fruit, like lots of watermelon during the summer. And, you know, she said, that's kind of strange. Like your blood markers were so good, too, on your blood work. You know, when you're eating all that fructose. And it's because it's coming from fruit. Now, people like to make kind of silly statements like, oh, it's because it's natural, right? Well, no, that's not because it's natural. You could artificially create a very similar effect in theory if you used refined sugars and added tons and tons of fiber. So the idea here, it has to do with the matrix of the whole food. In other words, the fructose isn't unbound. Right? So the stomach acids are not strong enough on their own to separate the fructose out of the fruit. It's still part of the whole food when it hits the upper intestine. All right, and that is an important point. That's a massive point. Why? Because when we consume refined sugars, and I don't care what they are, I don't care if they're table sugar, which is also called sucrose, or it's also called cane sugar, right? It's all the same substance, same chemical substance, just with different names. You have high fructose corn syrup. Both of these are approximately, high fructose corn syrup being a little higher, approximately 50% fructose, 50% glucose, and they're a very simple bond holding them together. There's no fiber involved. They're just floating there as a sugar molecule. Well, your stomach acids break that bond. So by the time your stomach acids and hydrochloric acid hit them, there's fructose just floating around in the mixture. So when it hits the upper intestine, which again can absorb into the bloodstream, it goes right through the lining, right? It gets absorbed directly into the bloodstream. Okay? Well, why is this a big deal? Well, because our body doesn't metabolize fructose as a carbohydrate, right? We want glucose. Our body thrives on glucose. It is its preferred fuel source of every cell in the body. We have cells in the body that can only run on glucose. Right? We have cells in the body, make that clear, they can only run on glucose, like certain nerve tissue, some of your organs, all your fast twitch muscle fibers. That's all they run on. They cannot run on lipids or triglycerides, you know, or fats or ketones. They can't do it. So they need to have that glucose, but it's your preferred fuel source. We thrive on it. And anytime people say, well, what about diabetics? Well, that's why diabetes is so horrible. It's a destructive metabolic condition to where your body doesn't appropriately handle its preferred primary fuel. That's why it's so bad. Okay, that's really, really bad. Okay, so that we understand that. But that can be managed too. That actually can be gotten under control, particularly obviously the type 2, type 1 requires medication for life. So the whole point here that we can't use the fructose. So we have a very small of an enzyme in our bloodstream that will convert some of the fructose into glucose, but it's a very, very small amount. And it will get a little bit of it, but we only produce so much of that, you know, per hour and per day. It's a very small amount. And we can't say the exact amount because it varies depending upon your metabolic health, your genetics, all sorts of factors. But it's a very small quantity. It can only handle, you know, a few grams here and there of fructose. All right. What about the rest? Well, the rest all has to go to the liver. Your liver converts fructose into glucose along with some other byproducts. That also elevates triglycerides. So one of the byproducts of it, too much of that fructose, in this case, all of it you consume from refined sugars, it doesn't get through that one enzyme, which would be most of it gets through it. And it's, again, quantitative. The more you consume, the higher the amount that reaches the liver. Right? The liver has to process it through a similar process to alcohol. Okay? So it puts a load on your liver. That's why people have noticed really large amounts of fructose create both insulin resistance, they cause fatty liver, because your liver has to process it. You know, saturated fat hits the liver pretty hard too, but fructose is definitely up there. They both hit it. So When it exceeds a certain threshold, it creates liver malfunction. It creates toxicity in the liver. Can create insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver. So essentially you can get a mild cirrhosis of the liver from consuming enough refined sugars. All right, so what about fruit? People say, well, fruit has a lot of fructose. It does. However, obviously it's harder to overconsume fruit, right? Try eating 2,000 calories of watermelon and come back to me. You'll understand, right? You can consume 200 calories of table sugar really easy. Super easy. In fact, even 1,000 calories of soda, go look how much soda. You could down that in one sitting. Most people could if they were thirsty. You can get that in, right? Try getting 1,000 calories of watermelon. For the record, a giant, big full-size watermelon, you're thinking of like the big one that's 10 plus pounds, is about 1,200 calories, right? The whole thing. That's a lot, okay? So with fruit, because it's in the matrix of the whole food, your stomach acids don't break it down. They get a little bit of it gets out and then hits your bloodstream in the upper intestine. But what ends up happening with it, it stays in there. It takes hours to digest it. It takes longer to digest fruit, way longer than it does just a pure sugar. So what ends up happening, it reaches your gut, your lower intestine. Our lower intestine is well designed to handle fructose. In fact, it loves it. So if you have healthy gut flora and a healthy gut biome, a lot of that gut biome will convert fruit. It will eat fructose, it will ferment fructose, and it will convert it into glucose, which is what we want. That is our desired end product. That is what we thrive on. That's what we burn. And if you don't have metabolic issues, large amounts of glucose is tolerated extremely well by the body. In fact, the more athletic you are, the more of it you have to have. Like your body needs it. Especially if you exercise a lot or you have a very physically demanding job, you have to have lots of it. You have to even survive and function. So when it reaches that, most of it gets converted into glucose. So it's way less of it reaches the bloodstream. A little bit will, okay? But then we have that enzyme that can handle some of it, all right? And then our liver, if a little bit of it reaches the liver, our liver handles a little bit of fructose just fine. It doesn't have a negative effect. It's when it gets overloaded with all the different things, fructose, alcohol, any of these things in large quantities start to have a very negative effect on the liver. But in small amounts, it's fine. And it is virtually, and I don't want to say impossible, but it is almost impossible for you to consume enough fruit to create a problem at the liver with the fructose. I'm not saying it can't be done, and I'm not talking about fruit juice, I'm talking about whole fruit. It's theoretically possible, but it's really difficult to do, and it's pretty unlikely. You would have to be force feeding thousands and thousands of calories of fruit every single day, and you would almost need to dehydrate some of it to even get enough in, right? Something like watermelon, you can't physically force enough down. It just won't fit. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.